Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Rye, School Board Chair. This workshop of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach is hereby convened at 4:00 p.m. on this 13th day of April 2021. Pursuant to the state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor's executive orders, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended by the Virginia General Assembly, and the school board's April 7th, 2020 emergency resolution, this workshop of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach will be conducted in person for school board members and certain staff members. However, due to the necessary health mitigation strategies in place, it's impractical and unfeasible for the public to attend this meeting in person. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on vbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV channel 47, and on Zoom. It is the school board's protocol to break at 5:30 p.m. to prepare for the regular school board meeting to begin at 6:00 p.m. At 5:30, the school board will conclude its informal meeting unless the board votes to continue until 5:45. The informal session will conclude no later than such time to allow the school board and the school administration to prepare for the regular school board meeting at 6:00 p.m. With that, Madam Clerk, would you kindly announce the school board members in attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in school board chambers is Chairwoman Rye, Ms. Melnick, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Felton, Ms. Franklin, Ms. Holtz, Ms. Riggs, and Ms. Weems. Attending via Zoom is Ms. Manning within the school administration building, and Ms. Hughes is out of town on a personal matter, and she's also attending via Zoom.
I'm sorry, did you mention Mrs. Holtz first? Oh, okay.
Ms.
excuse
Holtz
me.
is in the chamber.
So all right, with that, administrative matters and reports. Colleagues? Okay, I'll just mention that the National School Board Association Conference did take place during spring break. April 8th through 10th was last Thursday through Friday. A number of school board members were registered, and there'll be more information forthcoming with feedback on the conference. So that brings us to workshop agenda item B, budget reconciliation. And our presenter for this afternoon, Mr. Farrell Hunziker, our Chief Financial Officer. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Rye, Vice Chair. Melnick, school board members, Dr. Spence. Dr. Spence, do you want to kick it off?
No, Farrell, I think for the sake of time, we're going to let you jump right in. Just a note that there are some changes to the budget, which a reminder for board members and the community watching. This does happen because we get sort of new numbers from the state once the budget gets adopted, and we then bring that back and we talk about what we now know and any changes that we need to make. So this amended budget comes out of that process. So with that, Mr. Hunziker, turn it over to you.
Thank you. We're going to try to keep this as simple for you as I can make it. This slide shows the changes in the revenue, and that's based on the budget approved by the state, adopted by both the Senate and the House, and then ratified by the governor. So as you can see on the slide, we got $11,529,233 additional funds from the state. That's a combination of a state basic aid and state sales tax. We also are going to have a reduction in the revenue sharing formula funds by $2,853,854. As I understand it, the city manager in his proposed budget for next year is recommending a 1 cent decrease in the real estate tax. So our share of that reduction is the $2,853,000. That leaves revenue with subtracting what we lose from the local, from the increase in the state, a balance of $8,675,379. We also, because we got quite a bit more of funding from the state than we anticipated, we're recommending that we reduce the reliance that we have on the one-time school reserve funds by $3,965,653. If you recall, the original budget, we had budgeted $5,000,003. That was to cover the shortfall of funding. Well, we will bring that down now by reducing that 5.3 by $3,965,000. That puts us in a much better position in the future. We'll still have some one-time reserve funds, but nothing like 5.3. About a third of that is all that would be left for a future year. So the net funding available is $4,709,743. Our expenditure plan, shown on this slide, and the first item there is additional specialized support positions. When the state adopted the budget, there were some changes in the requirements of the SOQ, staffing standards, and some additional other requirements. We will get additional positions, a number, around 16 positions, and that's a combination of behavioral specialists, behavioral teachers. I think in that category is also psychologists and social workers. So a combination of those positions totaling $989,247. The next item we're proposing is, this was one of the items on the unmet needs, so we'll be able to check that one off, which is the increase in additional duty supplements, which haven't been changed in going back to I think mid-2000, 2005 or something like that. So that will be $1,262,972. We will also proposing to upgrade the identified clerical positions. If you recall, there was a market study and an equity study on these positions system-wide about 2 years ago, and we haven't been able to fund it. So this is another of the one-time needs that we can mark off for the total of $936,462. We're also able and are recommending that we upgrade all bus drivers, one up to pay grade U10. That's a total of $931,628. That's also an item we can check off that unmet needs list. And finally, the remaining balance of $589,434 are the needed additional teaching and support to support the AVID program and the Achievable Dream program. And so those are all just teachers for AVID and for the Achievable Dream. That balances the revenue, the net revenue we have available, and the expenditures in this spending plan. Now we have taken this information and we've created an amended budget resolution that we will ask you to approve tonight. This is what you will approve, that we will be sending over to the city council. So we've taken those additional dollars, we've created the format that the city's requiring us to have to put that in an amended budget resolution. Ms. Rye, we can read that now. Someone, once, hopefully you make a motion in the formal meeting for approval of this, in which at some point in time, somebody would read that. So we've just taken the dollars that I shared with you, of the additional revenue, and put it in the format of an amended budget that we will be asking the city council to approve. I will mention that on Tuesday, the 20th of this month, we will be making our budget presentation to the city council. It'll be the afternoon of, it's that afternoon next Tuesday. I don't have a time yet. Ms. Rye, the chairwoman, and our vice chair will attend with us. Dr. Spence, myself, and Tony Arnold will be making the presentation. So we're looking forward to our chance to present our amended budget to the city council and hopefully address any of the questions that they may have. We can open it up for questions at this time.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mrs. Anderson.
So I did read that the city manager had reduced that 1 cent reduction. Exactly how much is that? Do you know how much that is a savings for the city?
It's
Is that-
about $6.3 million.
And
in
so
our-
our reduction, the 2.853, is a certain percentage of what that
It's
1 cent?
47 point some percentage of the total.
Okay.
That's
Do you-
our split of the revenue sharing
Okay,
that we get.
okay. Well, I'm not saying that it's not deserved for people because, times are hard right now, and I think a 1 cent reduction is maybe necessary right now, but, being that we are getting additional money from the state, it did kind of offset it, so it came at a time that we can do that without being hurt drastically. I hope they don't make this a habit, because at a time when we're looking to increase our teacher salaries and increase, those are ongoing things that we need. We need to depend on our city. We need to depend on the state as well. But at a time when we really need them to make sure that, that we can depend on their budget, and that's revenue sharing formula, I just, I hope they don't make this a habit and that next year another penny's off and another penny's off. And I know that people out there, the public out there will say, well, we're having hard times too, and I get that. But in a city where we're expected to have top-notch schools, they expect that of us. I also expect to be able to pay our teachers what they're worth. So I'm concerned that this is not a precedent. So that's what I have to say about it. And I understand why it happened now, but hopefully this won't be something that they do in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Miss Owens.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question about the AVID and Achievable Dream additional teachers. Is this going to give us just like the one additional grade level for our Achievable Dream that's coming up, and then we'll need to plan, I guess, each year for the next subsequent
Yes.
4 or 5 years, I'm not sure where we are, to add, to make sure we have them?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Felton, then Mrs. Weems.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Farrell, for that deep presentation. Very thorough. Appreciate it. I'm just interested in the additional specialized support position. I know you said we're getting 16 positions there. Do we know how many of the teachers or psychologists or social workers we are getting, and how will they be leveled out to the schools? Is that
I
something
think
you can
there
speak
are
to
at
now?
least, I think there are at least 10 of the behavioral teacher and behavioral specialist, and then the remaining ones would be, I think, split between social workers, nurses, and psychologists. But the majority are behavioral teachers or behavioral specialists.
As far as
And-
how
and
they're.
that's really targeted for the mental health issues.
And we can get you the precise breakdown. And as far as how those are apportioned to the schools, generally those positions are apportioned on a per pupil basis. So like we need X number of nurses per X number of students. So like one nurse for every 600 students or what, I don't know the number in front of me. I have to go back and look. We have all that's outlined for us in the SOQs. And so we apportion it by that. So so sort of interestingly, what happened during the budget process this year. So for years, we've been talking to the General Assembly and asking for them to remove the support cap, which is that kind of cap on support positions. Well, they didn't do that, but what they did was they removed certain positions from that cap. And they said, we're going to provide additional funding for identified positions, which are the ones that Mr. Hunziker is talking about. And so that's where the additional state revenues have come from for those positions, but there's a cost to that. So the money comes in, but you've got to specifically use it for that purpose, and that's why you see that reduction in the resolution.
That was made clear. Thank you, Dr. Spence. Also, will these psychologists, I know there have been a point where they move from school to school, so will there be any permanent ones in a permanent position in a school, or will they be traveling from school to school?
Again, it generally depends on two things, and I'll get you a further response from this, and Dr. Rogers' team can do that. We'll get that to the board. But generally, it's the number of students that they're serving, and so typically that's going to be more than one school. And it's also need-based, so we do some identification of need based on schools where we see greater incidence of need. So, for example, our psychologists spend a lot of time working with IEP identification, right? And so if there's a school that has greater need, they would spend more time there, if that makes any sense. But we can get you a much more detailed response to how specifically they're apportioned by school and how that will look once the new positions come in.
Thank you, Dr. Spence, and I would like to see that. Thank you so much. Appreciate that explanation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mrs. Weems.
Thank you, and thank you, Farrell, and I would just like to say how much I appreciate that even before this reduction, we were able to really tackle a lot of our unmet needs. We're able to still give what I consider a fantastic raise to our employees, and then with this, we're still able to tackle the additional duty supplements, clerical positions, bus drivers, and all these other things. So again, like I've said many times, this is a very healthy budget. It's exciting to be able to do all the things that we've done after such a challenging year, and especially to be able to offer our employees such a nice raise this time around. So thank you, Farrell, and of course, I'm completely supportive of this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mrs. Melnick, then Mrs. Manning.
But one of the unmet needs that we're not able to tackle is teacher assistants, Dr. Spence.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. If you'll remember, that's about a $6 million total cost.
5 million.
I thought it was 5 and then another maybe 500,000 to do the equity adjustments. So it's a hefty price tag, but with reducing many of these others, I think it will allow us to be in a position in a future budget to look at that unmet need as one of the ones that we may want to prioritize, and that's certainly something we can talk about when we have our budget priority conversations in the future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Manning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hunziker, for the explanations here, and I'm really pleased that the folks that we work for, the citizen community, are gonna see, a tax decrease this year. That's great news if that gets passed by city council. And I just had a question for you, Mr. Hunziker, about the, America Rescue Plan Act. Is that 82 million extra that we're getting that we had not anticipated, or is that including some of the CARES Act funding that we already had?
Ms. Manning, that is an additional grant, so it's on top of the grants that we have already been awarded. And it's actually 82,400,000 and something dollars, and it was very much a surprise to us. We are still waiting for the formal announcement of that. We still don't have that exact information from VDOE, and we're anticipating getting that soon. So.
Okay, thank you. Are there restrictions?
How that money can be spent?
There are restrictions. They're very similar to what the other CARES Act funds required. So there could be some finer tuning restrictions that we're not aware of right now. I think they will be similar to the type of things that we could spend money for on the first few grants, and similar restrictions that we had on those grants. We will have, I think it's about 3 years to spend that fund. So obviously we're not going to go out and spend $82 million next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Holtz.
Thank you. The plan to move all bus drivers to grade U10, does that do anything for part-time bus drivers or substitutes? Do they get any kind of a bump?
I think I heard the question. You asked about substitutes for bus drivers?
Right.
Farrell and Dr. Spence has authorized part-time rate increases, which will help in all that respect. So, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else right now? I'll remind my colleagues, as an action item tonight, there'll be a further opportunity at that point to raise any questions that surface in the meantime. All right, so with that, then, thank you, and we'll see you again shortly, Mr. Hunziker. Thank you. Okay, we now welcome Dr. Myers-Dobbs for our special education update on inclusive practices. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chairwoman Melnick, school board members, and Dr. Spence. I'm Ronnie Myers-Dobbs, Executive Director of Office of Programs for Exceptional Children, and I'm here this evening to share some information related to inclusive practices. And joining me is Dr. Bob Pasternak, who is a consultant that's been working with us the last couple years, and he comes with a wealth of experience at the division, state, and federal level. And also Mrs. Donna Roble, who is a SEAC representative and a parent, should be participating with us virtually. So with the educational equity policy, it states to foster a barrier-free environment whereby all students, to include students with disabilities, have the opportunity to benefit from an establishment of high standards and the provision of access, support, effective and inclusive environments, and resources required for a high-quality education. So I just wanted to bring to your attention, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission completed a review of Virginia's K-12 special education system. They started this in 2018, and the report related to this came out in December of 2020. And it included a number of recommendations, and 4 of those recommendations align to inclusive practices. The first one states that VDOE, as part of its review of school divisions' IEPs, should determine whether the special education and related services provided to students enable students with disabilities to participate in both non-academic and extracurricular activities sufficiently. The recommendation 14 was that the BDOE should issue a superintendent's memo clarifying the school division's responsibilities as it relates to providing services to students to provide children with disabilities an equal opportunity to participate in non-academic and extracurricular activities. So that memo was released in January of 2021. And then we internally did a principal packet memo in February of 2021, just to bring everybody's attention to that. Recommendation 18 is for the General Assembly to consider amending the Code of Virginia to require each K-12 public school to complete the Inclusive School Self-Assessment Instrument and Action Planning Tool at least every 3 years. And then the last recommendation is for the General Assembly to consider including language in the Appropriation Act directing BDOE to develop and implement a clear and comprehensive plan to its approach to monitoring special education. And one of the areas, again, was that focus on inclusion in both academic and non-academic experiences and the use of discipline. So when you talk about inclusion, there is not one universally accepted definition of inclusion. The Virginia Board for People with Disabilities notes that inclusion is often used to refer not only to the physical presence of a student with a disability in the general education classroom, but also to the effective delivery of the services for that student so they can be an active participant in the classroom community. Others might refer to it as a vision or a practice. BDOE defines it as a school-wide and system-wide commitment to the structures and practices that are integrated across the system to support all students. So when you're talking about inclusion, IDEA and the Virginia regulations governing special education programs for children with disabilities, they don't use the term or define the term inclusion. However, the regulations do address the least restrictive environment, or LRE, and basically that's saying to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children without disabilities. And continuing within that, within the regulations, it talks about that students should not be removed from the general education environment unless it can be shown that it is not possible for them to be educated in this system, in this setting, without the supplementary aids and services. However, the regulations do require us to have a continuum of services for students across multiple settings, recognizing that some students cannot be served in the general education setting. In addition, as discussed previously, the regulations address that students with disabilities should participate with children without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate in non-academic and extracurricular activities, and they further define this as meals, recess, and clubs. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pasternak, who's going to talk a little bit about the role of the IEP team.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Just very quickly about me, you've heard about something called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is first came into existence in 1975, but I was the Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education, worked with President Bush, and I'm responsible for the 2004 reauthorization, which 17 years later continues to be the law of the land. And coming before you reminds me of my time as a recovering superintendent, which gives me tremendous PTSD for being here, but I also want to tell you how lucky you are to have Dr. Myers-Dobb leading your special education system. I'm all over the country, and I can say that given my experience seeing other folks who try to do that job, and also gives me tremendous appreciation and admiration for the job that your superintendent is doing here in the district, and thank you for what you're doing. So
Well, thank you for that introduction. May I just ask, because I'm thinking of our Zoom population and
Sure.
your distance from the mic, and I don't know, to the extent that you can, that would be great.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. Okay. Just very quickly, what does the school board really need to know about inclusion? And as Ronnie was just saying, in the law, the term inclusion is not ever in the statute. nor in the regulations. It's really a philosophy which is about what's the best place for students with disabilities to be. And as school board, and Carolyn, by the way, has been very helpful with the Special Ed Advisory Committee, and it's nice to see her again as well. And what I guess I want to emphasize to you all is that the I in the IDEA and the I in an IEP is all about the team making an individualized decision about what's the best place for that student with a disability to receive the majority of his or her education. And nationally, out of the 7 million students who receive special education across the United States, 63% last year were spending 80% or more of their time in the general education classroom. This year, that number has climbed all the way to 64% of students with disabilities spending 80% or more of their time in general education classrooms. So I guess what's important is that if parents come to you and they talk about inclusion, it's important for school board members to understand that the decision is made at the IEP team level, which includes the parent and should include the student. One of the many things I was unable to do in the reauthorization of the law was to require that students be at an IEP meeting, because IEP meetings are about the student, and the student, in my not so humble opinion, should clearly have an opportunity to participate in those meetings. I want to just, I guess, I know time is very limited, just to give you a couple of concerns. One is that I think that we have spent way too much time as a country focused on where the student is sitting and not enough time on what is happening for that student. And I know that this division is really committed under Dr. Spence and Ronnie and Kip and the folks that I've met here to live up to the mandate of a Supreme Court unanimous decision from a couple of terms ago, which was the Andrew decision, which really was the Supreme Court telling the country that we have to do a better job to improve outcomes and results for students with disabilities. And so where is the best place for that to happen? And the concern is that here we are since 1975 working on these issues, and only 23% of general education teachers feel adequately prepared to accommodate students with disabilities in their general education classroom. So while there are a lot of people who want students with disabilities to be in the general education classroom, the question for board members and the IEP team members is really, as Ronnie was just articulating from the law, to the maximum extent appropriate. Students with disabilities are to be educated with their non-disabled peers in curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular activities and settings. And so that's really the hard work that gets done at the IEP team committee, and clearly the importance of listening to the parent and the parent's desire, but also understanding that this division's commitment to students with disabilities, just like every local education agency across the country, is to provide a continuum of placements for students with disabilities, because the general education classroom might not be the best place for that student to receive the education that that student's entitled to under the law. And that really is the work of the IEP team, includes the parent. So I guess that's really all that I wanted to just kind of briefly mention, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Myers-Dobb, and I hope that there might be some questions that we can answer at the end.
Thank you.
So one thing he did not say about the role of the IEP team is part of that with the parent is the parent has to provide consent for implementation of that IEP. And so the team can propose a certain setting, but a parent must provide consent. And again, they propose that placement based on the individual student. It avoids any categorical decision-making. Also, you propose the placement based on the individual needs of that student as it's determined in that IEP. And part of that process when you're discussing placement is you're documenting all the alternatives that you considered and the rationale for choosing the actual placement that you, that the team decided on. So one of the documents that VDOE has put out is called the VDOE Critical Decision Points for Families of Children with Disabilities. And the purpose of this document is to assist parents in understanding some of those keys to academic success, which includes that transition from preschool to kindergarten, talks about attendance, understanding their parental rights, promoting that independence and self-determination of their students, diploma options, and how that relates to their post-secondary goals. It also has information related to critical decisions that are made during the child's educational path and the information that they need to make a well-informed decision. One of the critical decisions that is made at least annually, and again, is where the student's IEP will be implemented. More specifically, what environment will the student receive those services? So it's important for parents to understand the implications of the decisions related to participating or not participating in the general curriculum, which assessment the student's participating in, as well as the diploma option. So benefits of inclusive practices, there's higher expectations for all students. Students with disabilities who receive appropriate services and supports in general education make great gains in academic learning. Other benefits include attendance, social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes, as well as increased opportunities in the school community. So another document that VDOE has put out is the Inclusive Practices Guide. And this goes back to the recommendation of JLARC, where they say the General Assembly may wish to consider amending the Code of Virginia to require each school to complete that Quality Standards of Inclusive Schools assessment. That actual assessment is in this document. And the tool was developed to reflect evidence-based inclusive practices related to 9 quality indicators. And it's intended for a school to complete this through a team process to review their school's inclusive practices. So these are the 9 quality indicators for inclusive schools. Again, I'm just going to read through them really quickly, highlighting a couple things. I mean, the clear and consistent vision and vocabulary for inclusive schools. The legislative and accountability standards really go back to the special education performance indicators. And then specifically as it relates to inclusive practices, there are 2 that address the least restrictive environment. Strong Tier 1 instruction is obviously addressing both the behavior and academic needs of all students. Student-centered decisions, staffing, and scheduling goes back to making individual decisions for students based on the least restrictive environment, using our resources to address the needs of students, collaboration among all educators in a building to address the needs of all students. Specialized support is really talking about when you're considering providing services to a student outside of the general education setting, whether it's in a special class or whether you're looking at a regional day school or a private day school. Social inclusion is about meeting the whole child, and that really goes back to those non-academic and extracurricular activities, and then family and community engagement. So even though JLARC has recommended the General Assembly consider amending the code to require schools to complete this assessment, we've started the work in the division. Dr. Parrott and I have actually met with 3 pilot schools where we're beginning this process. There's 1 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high school. The schools were provided data related to students with disabilities included in the general education setting, 80% or more in a day, as well as students served outside of their school in settings such as CSEP, private day schools, and residential facilities. This is data, again, similar to the data in the Special Education Performance Indicator, Least Restrictive Environment Indicator 5 and 6. So in addition to that, we also looked at the percent of students with disabilities according to the fall membership on the school quality profile and compared the school's percentage of students with disabilities to the division's percentage of students with disabilities. So each school worked with their instructional leadership team to complete the assessment. And we had all of them choose standard number 1 because we really want to focus on that consistent vision for inclusion as well as the vocabulary. And then they chose 2 others based on how they, what the data showed on the assessment. So right now they're working through developing a plan to come up with strategies to improve their inclusive practices in those areas. And as they're working through this process, they're providing us feedback, so as we roll this out next year for all schools to do, we'll be able to really streamline the process and use their experience with this as we move through it. So that is all I have for tonight, and we'll be here to answer any questions. And again, hopefully Donna is still with us. Ms. Roble, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thanks. So I don't know if you have any comments or you just want to wait for some questions.
Welcome, Ms. Roble. Would you like to share a few comments before we turn it over to questions?
I'm here for any questions.
Okay. Colleagues. We'll start with Mrs. Weems.
You know, I have a lot of comments and questions, Ronnie.
That's okay.
But I echo Dr. Pasternak's statements. We're sure lucky to have you, and thank you for everything that you do for our special kiddos and their families and who receive special education services. And Dr. Pasternak, it's been wonderful getting to know you and picking your brain, and it's amazing how much you know in the subject area. So thank you. He could go on forever. But I have a couple questions. With the social inclusion, and we kind of hit on this, I think, a little bit at SEAC last time. What exactly are we doing and how are we including children, all children, in these areas, for example? And I do have experience with this. I've been on IEP teams for 2 out of 6 children I'm raising, both different, learning differences, and so I've been through the process completely personally 2 times, different decades too. So it's just kind of interesting to compare. But I remember when one of my sons was in it, he was not included in lunch. They had their special education class. They all went together. He wasn't included in the special population. And this was when he would let me still go to lunch with them. And it was, kind of disheartening for a parent to see that. So I'm hoping, and I think that has changed, but is it school-based? How are we including all these kids to be able to interact in recess, in lunchtime, and then in extracurricular activities? And in that note home, I think that you said that, the JLARC recommendation of 14 was a memo sent home. What did that say to try to make sure that parents and families know about including their students?
And again, that goes back to the IEP team. The IEP team does discuss that as part of how they're included, whether it's lunch, recess, clubs. So during the school day, yes, I think we have some students that really go into the cafeteria and they interact with their grade level peers, and we have others that you may not see that happen as often. And sometimes I think it could be a preference of the student, and it could be sometimes that's how it's set up. So that's one thing I know that Ms. Roble talked about when we mentioned this, is she felt like in some schools that there were still areas where it was a little bit more isolated. So, there's always things in room and for improvement. But I do see that all of our students are included throughout the day, even if you have a student who's in a self-contained setting, but they might move into the general education setting for the morning meeting. So we even have some students that go in for that, and that's where you might see some of that social inclusion. So maybe academically, they're not ready to move into the general education setting, but you're giving them other opportunities. And as it comes to like extracurricular activities, we have a lot of students that, well, not the last 18 months, but prior to our current situation, that did participate in clubs and drama. We even have some situations where students have a one-on-one assistant that we actually pay to stay after school to support that child with the extracurricular activities. Transportation, sometimes we still have to provide that special transportation after school if they can't ride the typical activity bus. So it varies depending on the child, what the team has discussed, and obviously the level too, whether you're talking elementary, middle, or high.
Right.
The actual memo that we were talking about, that was a superintendent's memo. The VDOE put the superintendent memo out to all the school divisions. And then we internally did a principal packet memo to all the schools to make sure that the administration was aware of that the IEP team needs to have some discussion about extracurricular activities at the IEP meetings and to consider any accommodations, modifications that would allow a student to participate in non-academic and extracurricular activities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just real quickly, part of the importance of your question is to help kids and adults live up to what Senator Kennedy taught me many years ago, may rest in peace, and that is disability is not inability. And to create a culture where we really embrace diversity, and that's why the social opportunities for these kids are so critically important. A lot of times we focus only on the academic side of inclusion, but as you were quick to point out, there are also some great benefits that can occur when kids get to understand that their peers have many strengths as well as the disabilities that they bring to the table.
Yes, yes. So I'm glad to hear that we've made some changes, and I hope that we strive to improve in those areas. And that's a great segue for my next question is, like, my son started participating in IEP meetings when he was in high school, and I don't know if that was just because I asked. And I always said, Dr. Pasternak, you'll be proud of me. I always talked with him about his learning difference, and I always told him, you are not learning disabled. In fact, I wish that this will be your next thing to do. I wish that we would change it all to learning differences instead of learning disabilities, because you're not disabled to learn, you learn differently. So I always preach that to my child, and so I had him included into the IEP meetings to advocate how he learned differently and how he learned better this way than that way. So is that system-wide? When do we let our students attend those IEP meetings? And is it just up to the parent, or is it up to the IEP team, or how are we doing that?
There comes a point at which it's required, but I can tell you I've been in IEP meetings where I'll have some upper elementary age students that would participate. And then when you move into middle school, you will see it happen more. I think sometimes it depends on what you're going to be discussing. Sometimes parents don't want
Right.
their child to hear the entire conversation. Sometimes they'll come in for a piece of the conversation, especially if you're talking about the transition plan to ensure you have that student voice. So sometimes they'll bring them in and then they'll excuse them. So,
And what's the age requirement that they are to
so
attend?
at age 14, you'll
14.
start seeing them.
Okay.
For transition, the law says that you as the parent safeguard the rights of your child until the child reaches the age of 18, at which point the rights that you've protected for that child become the child's responsibility. But the other thing I want to quickly mention is to your first point, there's a movement afoot to talk about differently abled as opposed to disability.
Okay,
So
good.
I
I
think
like
that kind of language, and you may know the name of Tim Schreiber, who runs Special Olympics, and Tim is the one who really is trying to spearhead that effort across the country.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, one last thing with the training with general education teachers who have a classroom, and we've heard this for a long time. I'm a ninth grade teacher. I teach just a regular ninth grade English, and I have, 11 students that have an IEP in my class. So I need training, and your statistics show, and I know that we've upped the training. Can you just kind of go over how the training for the general ed teacher is going? And are we still abiding by certain numbers? Can you kind of briefly tell us how our general classroom looks that have so many students with IEPs, and how that teacher is supported to be able to deliver instruction that meets the needs of all those different learners?
So what was the first question? I missed that.
About how the training is going for
Oh,
our
yeah,
general
so
ed
training,
teachers.
a lot of the training related to general education teachers has been at the school level, because oftentimes the principal will ask either the instructional specialist or the coordinator to provide that training. Sometimes they set it up where it's the general education teacher and the special education teacher that work together in the general education setting. So sometimes they'll pair it up and only have the specific pairs participating in the training. Sometimes they do it, we've done it for the entire staff. It's really varied based on the need that's been identified in a specific building. So there was a lot of it being done prior to our current situation, but it's definitely been driven at the building level, because I think every building is really at a different place, and the principal has given us feedback on where they really think that training needs to occur. You'll see a lot of it occur around behaviors, interfering behaviors, particularly if you're talking about students with autism, for example, that might demonstrate interfering behaviors. They're not disruptive behaviors, but they're interfering behaviors. So how do we work with that particular student to keep them on task individually so that they're able to focus on their education as well as everyone else? So, I mean, the BCBAs Our behavior intervention specialists they do a lot of work, again, individually with supporting teachers, as well as doing training for schools. Again, sometimes it's just a teacher and a TA. How do you specifically work with an individual student? Sometimes it's like all of third grade is getting the training. So it varies based on the need.
I would also point out that sadly, the teacher preparation institutions across the country are doing a lousy job of helping teachers really understand how to work with kids with disabilities. And I think that the job that the divisions have to do is made more difficult because of the fact that teachers, and I have tremendous respect and appreciation for teachers and the difficult job we ask them to do, but the teacher training needs significant improvement.
Okay, thank you, and just,
We
she
do
didn't
have.
finish her sentence about are we still getting like 16 kids with IEPs in one classroom?
No, we don't, no. We try to keep it, I mean, again, I think when you look at our division average is 12.3%, that's one thing you'll hear people say to try to mirror it to the percentage of the division. But again, I think that depends on the individual school, how many students they had at a particular grade level. You know, sometimes at third grade, if you have 10 students with disabilities, you might see them broken up 5 and 5. So you have a teacher going between those two classrooms.
Okay, thank you.
So no, we don't try to.
I know you don't
have
have, but
one
we hear that from
class.
teachers and,
Right.
yeah.
I know PE, that was one of the examples that you gave. So often, a lot of times, the teacher assistants will go to PE to support the number of students just in PE in general and the support that may be required.
Well, that is all good information to know. Thank you both. Ms. Owens and then Mrs. Holtz.
Thank you. I only have one question for right now. With the family and community engagement piece as one of the 9 quality indicators, I know that we have our FACE office who are taking on a lot of new tasks. Is there anything specific that we're working on to better engage our special education parents and support them in really understanding their rights and what they should be looking for? I think it's just can be an overwhelming process to participate in as a parent. Like Ms. Weems, I participated in IEP teams throughout my son's education, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of people in the room, and the idea of having an advocate, or doesn't even have to be a specific advocate, but somebody who has reached out to you prior to coming into a room with 10 other professionals and kind of talked to you and prepped you and is your go-to person to look at. Is that something that we're working on? Or
So, and again, our Parent Support Information Center, she does a lot of that. A lot of parents will call her prior to meetings just to kind of walk through. We have parents that have ongoing relationships with our coordinators. They might have attended meetings with them previously. They'll call them and kind of walk through a situation that they're walking into. Many of our coordinators participate still in IEP meetings. But it's interesting that you brought up that piece because 2 of the schools, of the 3 pilot schools, they selected that one. And one of the, part of the conversation was related to, at the elementary school, if a child has been at that elementary school K through 5, that parent's really gotten accustomed to the support that's provided by that administration or that teacher. So sometimes they move on to middle school and then they're like, oh no, because they had that trusted individual at that elementary school. So they may not have learned everything that they needed to do to move on because they've really valued and trusted that individual person. So we talked a lot about that in making sure that we're providing the parents the resources that as their child moves on through their education, they have what they need and that they're not relying on an individual person. So,
thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Holtz, then Mrs. Manning and Mrs. Anderson.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were 3 schools included in the pilot program. Are you at liberty to mention those schools and why they were chosen? I wondered if they were like geographically close or are they feeder schools? Because you just, alluded to that, continuation.
yeah. So it's Providence, Kempsville Middle School, and Kempsville High School. So one thing that we looked at when we were selecting the pilot school was schools was to make sure that they had some programming, but they weren't a school like Pembroke Elementary who has a large amount of programming. So we try to keep it balanced. And Providence, for example, has 2 different programs. So then as we talked through it, we were like, okay, well, let's just do the feeder pattern. So it just kind of fell into place.
Does that cover it, Mrs. Holtz? Okay, good. Mrs. Manning?
Thank you. Dr. Pasternak, I really liked what you had to say about focusing on where the student is sitting, not just focusing on where the student is sitting, but what is happening. I really liked that statement that you made. And you both also emphasized the importance of parents being involved in the process. And I think that in the past, that may be something that wasn't really emphasized as much as you are now. And so I appreciate that. And so I have 2 questions, one on that first topic, and I think this is for Ms. Roble if she is still with us. Making sure that parents are involved in the IEP process, and I know that we have taken extra measures of making sure that our assistant principals understand the process and are trained. And I know that we're in an unusual situation now with COVID, but I just wanted to ask Ms. Roble, do you see improvements happening in that process of making sure that parents are included and understand the process and that staff is getting better trained?
I do feel like we have made a lot of progress with including our parents in the special education process altogether. I work for the Partnership for People with Disabilities out of Virginia Commonwealth University. So I mentor a lot of families doing this. So it's really interesting to be, I'm there as support for the families, but I'm seeing, what's going on with the whole team. And I see we've made a lot of progress in educating our families about special education, the timelines, through the eligibility. You have 65 working days to complete that comprehensive evaluation before eligibility is determined. Parents are now aware of that and they're marking their calendars. 10 years ago, I didn't see that. So there's a lot of progress there. And I cover school divisions throughout Hampton Roads, and I'm always proud of Virginia Beach and where we are with that.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And thank you also for your advocacy in making this happen. I know you've been an instrumental part of SEAC, and I just want to thank you for all your hard work that you've done to help our division and to bring attention to areas that we may need improvement on. And then just my second question is probably for Dr. Myers-Dobbs. How are we making sure, I know that recently, we had some issues with making sure that we had SEAC representation in some important policy decisions. Going forward, how are we making sure that we have a SEAC representative involved in any type of policy decision that we are making for any of our students with learning differences?
I believe Ms. Williams has had a conversation
About working through that. Yes, Ms. Manning and colleagues, we have kind of a system now, and Ms. Trinace Riggs is the policy chair, and so they reach out to she reaches out to Sandy Herman, who's the policy chair for the SEAC, with any policies coming forward, so that her committee can review, and then her committee always has an open door invite to any of Ms. Riggs and the school board's policy meetings, that they can actually review all policies, because sometimes there's a gray area to decide which policy is special ed, because if we do have inclusion in our buildings, you could sometimes argue that they all would be inclusive of some sort of special education, look-see first. So, but Ms. Herman knows that she can attend all meetings and she can get any policy ahead of time that specifically deals with special education. And we've worked on that. It has not always been the case, but I think we've improved that whole process, and hopefully it's working well and will in the future.
It's a good point to remind the board that every student with a disability is first a general education student. And secondly, just in response to your great question, the IEP process is incredibly complicated. And I would just remind you and the board and any parents listening that there is a federally funded parent training and information center in every state in the country. In the Commonwealth, it's called the PTSI. And PTSI does conduct training for parents all the time so that parents of kids with disabilities can understand their rights and responsibilities, which are, as you know, very complex. And it is the only law in all of education where if parents are unhappy with the education their student is receiving, they can sue the school district. And that's clearly something I know the board would like to avoid.
So we're good.
Thank you. Just one last thing, if I could.
I just want to give some kudos to Dr. Myers-Dobbs and her team. Thank you for the hard work that you've done over the last year or so in with training our staff on how to better serve our students and our families. It's so great to hear from Ms. Roble that we are seeing some positive changes. And so thank you so much for all that you've done.
I appreciate that. And one thing I wanted to add, parent involvement, we have recognized during our current situation that having the meetings virtually has really increased our parent participation. So that's something as we move forward, we will still utilize that because it helps those parents, particularly the working parents that are using their lunch break to attend those meetings. It takes out all that travel time. So they're able to participate more fully in the meetings.
So we're going to wrap this up with Mrs. Anderson, but it's a critical enough topic that I want all my colleagues to feel free to follow up with our two staff members here moving forward. But Mrs. Anderson, because we do have one final workshop topic.
Thank you. That's fantastic about the Zoom ability and what it's done. And I've said for quite a while that I think Zoom is here to stay in some respects. But I just want to say that I've also been on both sides of the IEP process as a parent, participating for my own child through the process. And I just want to help explain to parents that parents out there, you are the biggest advocate for your child. So it's very important that I'm glad this year that that the Zoom part of it is allowing more parents to participate. That's great. But also, I've also been on a part of the IEP process as a teacher, both as sitting in the IEP meeting advocating for my student, and then also as a general classroom teacher implementing those inclusion students and what their needs were as well. So I've been seen a lot of it over the years. But my question has to do with who controls how many inclusion students are assigned to a general education teacher classroom, and who monitors that? Because I know that principals are probably, you're probably going to tell me that the principal decides in their own school, but who monitors to make sure that a general education classroom is not overburdened sometimes? And I hate to put it that way, but that's what it can be sometimes when you have 8 or 9 inclusion students in a general education classroom. And a lot of times you even have to have a special education teacher assistant come in with this to help monitor. But sometimes it can be overtaxing on everybody. So who monitors that?
And again, like you mentioned, it is a building decision because that's part of scheduling. So when at the beginning of the school year and they're looking at the needs of their students with disabilities, they need to look at where students need support services and then balance it out as much as possible through that scheduling. And then sometimes especially if you're in a school that's a little bit more transient than others, you might see throughout the year that there is an increase in the number of students in a particular class, and then adjustments will have to be made. But I know our assistant principals work really hard at the beginning of the school year to look at those schedules and look at where the services are needed and to work through a schedule that's going to support the students and also meet the needs of the teachers, because it is that balance to make sure that teachers are able to meet the needs of all students.
So would you suggest that if a teacher is feeling, like they have several already inclusion students, a general education teacher, should they would you suggest that they go to their principal, assistant principal, and
And sometimes it's about support and just working through, like, does that general education teacher need support at a particular time of the day where there might be a lot of transitions, for some reason that they just need another person in there to assist. So I do think it's something that they need to sit down and talk through with their building administration. And, is the special education teacher not in there at a particular time where the general education teacher feels that they need to be there? So it's that constant collaboration between general educator and special educator to ensure you're meeting the needs of all students.
right? I think what you do, I appreciate what you're doing, and we've come a long way. Yes, sir.
But just neither the statute nor the regulations address the answer to your question. There is no statutory language that dictates how many students with disabilities can be in a general education classroom. But it is a problem that generally better teachers who are more receptive to having kids with disabilities in their classroom wind up with more kids with disabilities
Yeah.
in their classroom.
That's true. I've been on that end too. Thank
All
you.
right, we thank you both so much, and Ms. Zerble, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our final workshop topic, we're beginning with Dr. Robertson on our our continued school reopening. We want to welcome back to all our families and staff who have returned from spring breaks. So with that, Dr. Robertson.
So I'm waiting for Regina. Okay. So good afternoon, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chair Melnick, board members, and Dr. Spence. I'm Don Robertson, the Chief Schools Officer, and this afternoon I'll be joined by Jack Freeman, our Chief Operations Officer, and Dr. Kip Rogers, our Chief Academic Officer, to provide several updates for the board on our continuing efforts to support our students and staff this school year. This workshop will include further updates on extracurricular programs at the high school level, plans for the class of 2021 graduation, the return of Option 1 students in grades 7 through 12 to 4 days per week of in-person learning, planning efforts underway for school year 21-22, and opportunity for questions at the end. We have several fall teams participating in postseason play and look forward to their success. Spring sports started yesterday, and we, again, are thankful to the board for allowing us to have this opportunity. As I shared previously, schools are committed to providing as many activities as possible to help our students have a full education experience. In terms of our fine arts programs, such as theater, band, and chorus, we are working on plans to allow for spectators to attend spring concerts or plays, up to 30% of the indoor auditorium capacity. We're excited to be able to provide this opportunity for our families, students, and staff, and more information is to come as these plans are finalized. Schools are also finalizing plans related to other traditional end-of-year celebrations, and I encourage parents to be on the lookout or to contact their child's school student activities coordinator for more information on these activities. I was hoping to be able to share tonight our final plan for the class of 2021 graduation ceremonies. However, we had a recent entry of the Veterans United Home Loan Amphitheater as an option to host our graduations. Over the past 3 weeks, my team has met with Live Nation staff to investigate the availability of the amphitheater to host our graduation ceremonies. Currently, we are awaiting a final approval of this option. I can share that if we use the amphitheater, then schools will be restricted to 4 guests per graduate. And this is to meet the physical distancing requirements for seating under the covered canopy area. Given the heat and potential for rain, we would allow schools to host a single ceremony with all of their students in a more traditional manner. We'll also have live streaming available for those family members who could not secure a ticket or could not attend in person. The other option schools have would involve hosting numerous smaller ceremonies similar to last year based on physical distancing requirements. And as soon as we hear back from Live Nation, we'll share our plans with the board, staff, students, and parents, hopefully by the end of this week. As we have done throughout the pandemic, we have continued to strategically plan and prepare to bring more students back to in-person learning. In the weeks leading up to spring break, Dr. Spence and members of his leadership team completed multiple secondary school visits to gain firsthand information on what would be necessary to welcome back Option 1 students to 4 days per week. At the same time, my staff in the Department of School Leadership was meeting with principals to determine what staffing needs they may have to accommodate the additional students each day in a manner that supports all health and safety mitigations. And the transportation team was confirming their abilities to safely transport additional students each day. As a result of this work, I'm happy to announce that we are planning to return all current Option 1 students to in-person learning 4 days per week, beginning on Tuesday, April 27th. Our next steps include sharing this information officially with staff, students, and parents. Central support staff, under the direction of school leadership, will be addressing some of the areas of need identified from our planning work as noted above. Finally, and most importantly, this plan to bring back students to in-person learning 4 days per week is based on the number of current Option 1 students. This means that any current Option 2 students who hear of this change and wish now to return to Option 1 may or may not be able to be accommodated. For a secondary student who wishes to return to Option 1 means there must be room in all of their scheduled classes. We cannot allow any student to return to in-person learning unless all of their classes have room to accommodate their presence. As we have in the past, parents should contact school administration to make a request if they want to move from one option to the other. But know that no changes will be approved until May 3rd at the earliest, as schools will need the week of April 27th to assess classroom space availability. And before I proceed with an update on school year 2021-22 planning, Jack Freeman is going to share an update on vaccinations.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. So just want to share this briefly. So this was actually a communication that came into Madam Chairwoman yesterday from FEMA, and she asked that I share it with the group. So this is a slide and pamphlet that they're sending out. So what this means essentially is more support continues to come regarding vaccinations. And this is an example that FEMA is going to have a site over at Military Circle Mall. It's kind of combined with the Norfolk process that they have over there. Significance about this is the age will go down to age 16 to be able to receive it, and walk-in appointments will be possible as well. Now, certainly appointments will continue to be encouraged because that makes the process move more smoothly, but they are offering walk-ins. Had a follow-up conversation with the emergency manager for Virginia Beach today. Similar is happening in Virginia Beach. So at the convention center, they're going to start to block off a number of days where walk-ins will be possible. We will share that information later so that our community can see and be aware of what those opportunities are. So continued movement. You've likely seen in the news that there's been some developments with Johnson & Johnson. So that's all very new information. We know that the state of Virginia is no longer going to be issuing those until they get resolution on that. I also read via media channels, not through official channels, about that this was more broad happening at the CDC level. So more to follow on how that might affect us, but that's where we are with vaccines at this point. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
The board has asked us to provide information on planning for school year 21-22. Currently, we are planning to no longer have Mondays reserved for staff professional development and student asynchronous learning. We are looking towards 5 days of instruction per week, but whether that is 5 days in person or some hybrid version is still unknown. In a moment, Dr. Rogers will share our recommendations for virtual learning in school year 21-22. And as I shared in the last board workshop, a select group of principals from each level worked with my team to develop planning ceremonies based on potential pandemic restrictions. I'll be sharing those results in the presentation after Dr. Rogers presents. And so at this time, I'll invite Dr. Rogers to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Ryan, Vice Chair Melnick, school board members, and Dr. Spence. This afternoon, I will provide you with a very high-level update on where we are with planning for virtual learning opportunities for students during the 2021-22 school year. And as we approach the final quarter of the 2020-21 school year, we are prepared to make a recommendation on how we know that we can best serve the needs of our students and families who opt to participate in virtual learning full-time next school year. We've learned quite a bit about teaching and learning in a virtual environment over these past 13 months, and the data and experiences that we've had have helped to shape what our recommendation is. We convened a work group consisting of about 47 staff members across many departments that's shown in a slide in front of you. We also had several principals representing all levels with the goal of determining the best, robust virtual learning option for our students next year. Now, feedback from the work group members and from principals was such that we need to plan for a robust, single, primary virtual learning option that with which we can provide a solid foundation and continue to build upon if necessary in subsequent years. So, after much discussion, we ultimately decided to recommend that we utilize the Virginia Department of Education's supported Virtual Virginia program as the primary source for virtual learning opportunities for our students in grades K through 12 who choose 100% virtual learning for the 2021-22 school year. And while we know that elementary students who do enroll in the Virtual Virginia program, should we decide to move forward with it, will be successful, we are encouraging early learners in grades K through 2 to attend school in a face-to-face setting next school year. And at the secondary level, we do understand that we will need to continue to support some students with our virtual learning programs that we already had in place prior to the pandemic. And it's also important to note that through our discussions, the Virtual Learning Center has been a huge success for us and our students this year. However, it does represent some challenges relative to course offerings as well as staffing. And by utilizing the Virtual Virginia program, we would significantly reduce many of those challenges. We also realize that even if we did utilize our VLC next year, we will still have the need to offer some Virtual Virginia courses to our students. So now I'd like to share just a little bit of information about Virtual Virginia. Virtual Virginia is a program of the Virginia Department of Education that offers online advanced placement, world language, basic core academic, and elective courses to students all throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. The program itself has been a viable option for virtual learning for students in Virginia for several years. And in August of 2020, the Virginia Department of Education announced that every teacher in the Commonwealth's public schools would be able to host virtual classes on the Virginia Department of Education's Virtual Virginia online learning system throughout the 2020-21 school year. And that expansion of Virtual Virginia did include the creation of digital content for students in grades K through 8. And prior to the corona pandemic, this was done for the first time. At the time of expansion, more than 90% of Virginia's 132 divisions were either using the Virtual Virginia platform or either enrolling students in the Virtual Virginia courses. Now, Virtual Virginia does now implement synchronous instruction, primarily before it was asynchronous. Students would be taught by a licensed teacher. The schedules that they have for elementary and secondary students are similar to our student schedules now. And Virtual Virginia does use, so much for my fancy PowerPoint presentation going up, but Virtual Virginia does use the Canvas learning management system, whereas we use Schoology, so there would be some differences there. Now, earlier this month, several staff from DTAL and DOSL met with Virtual Virginia leadership to ask some thought-provoking questions that came up as a result of our 7 work groups that we had. And ultimately, we left the meeting with the understanding that Virtual Virginia does plan to work extremely closely with our families, division staff, and homeschool staff to ensure the success of students who participate in it. As you can see, there are costs associated with having students enroll in Virtual Virginia. And as you can see, the cost for Virginia Beach City Public Schools students at the elementary level would be $3,600 per student for the full school year, and that is based on the local composite index. Costs associated with courses for secondary students run $175 per course per semester, or $350 per course for the full year for students in grades 6 through 8. Additionally, there may be some costs associated for textbooks and other literature books used for English. I did have an opportunity to participate in another meeting this morning, actually, with some other central office leaders throughout our region today to get some additional clarification on some of the questions that we have. But our next action steps are to create a critical pathway for our staff as well as for our students that includes a timeline for implementation as well as a communication plan for our families. Dr. Robertson will share, we also plan to survey our families relatively soon so we can get that information to move forward on that. And then lastly, we will determine any resource needs for resources that may be needed to make sure that our students are being successful. For example, the textbooks that I mentioned previously, and any potential support staff that may be needed to make sure that our students are being successful. The work group that we convened is meeting again tomorrow to continue working on the timeline and next steps. With that, I will turn the rest of the presentation over to Dr. Robertson.
So, thank you, Dr. Rogers. I think it's important to note that the information captured here on this slide was done independently from what you just heard from Dr. Rogers. The alignment between what the two committees demonstrate a common vision for what we believe is best for all students next year. Here's the information from the elementary school principals, noting we gave them 3 scenarios: schools reopening without physical distancing requirements, schools reopening with some, and schools reopening with current physical distancing requirements. And when you're looking at the elementary piece, note that the elementary school principals, and this is consistent, want kids back in school 5 days per week. That's what they feel is best, and that's what they want. They also are unanimous in the fact that they want a virtual option. They just don't want to have control over the virtual option because of some of the challenges we had this year. It added tremendous workload to their plates. And although concurrent instruction has its place, the elementary is not interested in the concurrent instruction piece at all. When we look at middle school, I think if you note in the left column, middle school wants to go back to their AB or Bell schedule, which is something they used previous to the pandemic, should we be opening schools without any physical distancing requirements. Lessons learned, they also like the 4x4 if we were in a situation like we're in right now. They felt like that was a win for students and staff by having kids have to focus on fewer classes at a time, and students and teachers having less students to work with at a time. So similar areas, again, 5 days per week, having a virtual option, and again, limiting or eliminating concurrent instruction. High school. High school, again, noted that should we go back without physical distancing requirements, they want to go back to AB as their common schedule. However, they have found great success in certain courses with 4x4. So they want to be able to continue offering 4x4 classes where appropriate. We know that in certain circumstances, 4x4 doesn't work as well. In other circumstances, 4x4 does work well. And all the way at the other end, if we're in the same situation we're in now, they like the 4x4 as the primary model because, again, same reasons. Kids have to focus on less classes at a time. Teachers have a smaller caseload. They want kids back 5 days per week in in-person instruction. They also want a virtual option, and they want to eliminate concurrent instruction. So some of the similarities I've captured here on the slide, and so let me reiterate that Dr. Spence and his team, we are committed to having kids in person 5 days per week next year. The only reason we wouldn't do that is if we just couldn't. But we're going to uncover every stone, including looking at additional portables, whatever we need to do, bring in additional staff, use the CARES money. We want kids in school 5 days per week next year. We also support a fully virtual option. We think that parents found success with that. We believe that a fully virtual option will capture some of our homeschool students. We have about 3,500 each year. Some of those students want to come to school in Virginia Beach. They just like the flexibility and freedom that homeschool gives them. And by creating the ability to participate in athletics and extracurricular activities because they'll be assigned to a homeschool, we believe will capture some of those students and their families who, again, are homeschooled and not in our current counts. We believe will capture them and coming back to Virginia Beach because they can enroll in Virginia Beach and participate in Virtual Virginia. Virginia Beach covers the cost, so they don't have to pay, and they can continue to play, or they can play athletics, which is to date never been an option for them. We also support moving away from concurrent instruction. We recognize that the scheduling model we created this year really required at the secondary level the use of concurrent instruction. Teachers have made it work. We paid them for it, but it's a lot of work. We want to move away from that. And we also have to openly recognize that we can't predict what the requirements might be for when we open next year. But we're going to do everything we can in our power to get kids back in school 5 days per week. So next steps, before closing, I want to reiterate that as soon as we receive an answer from Live Nation, we will be ready to communicate plans for the class of 2021 graduation. And now that we have settled on a fully virtual option for next year, we'll be surveying our parents in grades K through 11 to determine their preference for a fully virtual option for next year. The results will be shared with the board on May 11th. And finally, we are working to be able to share our recommended plan and our backup plan for next year on May 11th. Again, giving you more notice, giving families more notice, giving schools more notice on what we're thinking about for next year. We've moved that timeline up to May 11th. And again, we're hoping this will give people more time to provide feedback and on what we're providing. So at this time, we are available to answer any questions that you might have.
So I have a proposal. I mean, we can certainly sneak in a few, but I suspect there are quite a few that we do plan to continue question and answer in the workshop formal meeting format. Agenda item 17, is it? But I could be wrong if we only have a few questions. So let's use the remaining few minutes for anybody who cares to weigh in now, or Ms. Owens.
Yeah, I have two to start. And it sounded like you said this, but I just want to make sure I'm clear that families who choose Virtual Virginia option, our district would be covering all the costs for that?
That's correct.
Okay. And do we know if they have, I would assume, the same classroom size caps as what we use here in Virginia Beach, as far as in Virginia Beach, if we expect our child to have no more than X number of students in a classroom, are we expecting to see the same in their classrooms? Okay.
That's correct.
They staff that based on the state SOQ limitations, that same ones that we have. It's Virginia Department of Education run, so they have the same limitations, unlike, for example, any private company that may not have some of those limitations. So the answer to that is just, I think we should be clear, because it can be a little confusing. Those students become Virginia Beach students, and we receive ADM funding for those students. And because we receive ADM funding for those students, we're able to then pay for them to attend Virtual Virginia. So it's not an additional expense to us. It's actually a recaptured expense for us. If a student were to decide to enroll virtually, rather than, as the example that Dr. Robertson was giving about homeschooling, that would actually be a recaptured expense for us because we would receive ADM and then we would pay for them to attend Virtual Virginia. So it's not an add-on expense. I think I saw a few eyebrows raised when that conversation was happening.
Sure. Okay. I have one more, but I can wait if somebody else has.
Might as well go ahead because I think we're going to have to continue.
Okay. Is ultimately the recommendation to go with Virtual Virginia, was that more so, I guess, based on Virtual Virginia kind of being already ready-made and I guess they're ready to go? Because when I'm not mathematical as far as these expenses like that Farrell would pull up, but just kind of quick glance, and I'm thinking like 25 students in a classroom looks like about $90,000 if we could hire a teacher to teach that virtual class for less than 90,000, or a teacher and a teacher assistant.
So
I don't know if that's the better use, but if it's all the way set up already, is that why we're?
It's not, it's actually a good deal for the school division. So if you recall, we spend about $10,000 per student on an annual basis. And so if you said 25, the actual cost to Virginia Beach on a per student basis is going to be about $250,000. And that's because you have administrative support, buses, cafeteria and food services. I mean, you have everything else that's built into the system for students, and textbook costs, curriculum costs. I mean, everything. And so it's actually a pretty good deal for Virginia Beach for us to have our any of those students who want to have that opportunity attend Virtual Virginia. It also helps, and I think, Dr. Rogers, if you want to speak to the committee's conversation about the why of that choice versus what, for example, some people might be wondering, well, why not just build our own virtual learning program? Because I think other school divisions are probably going to do some will do that and some will do what we're recommending. But I know the committee talked about both options, and you want to talk a little bit about the why?
That was a great discussion about whether or not we were going to do it ourselves or not, because we did VLC so well. And it required a lot, and a lot of staff time, a lot of teacher time. As you heard Dr. Robertson share, schools don't want to do concurrent teaching. They don't want to do it. And inevitably, we would have to resort to some level of concurrent teaching if we did that in-house. So that was a huge part of that aspect in terms of the decision that we made. And quite frankly, we had a wonderful conversation with the executive director at Virtual Virginia on the Friday prior to our leaving for spring break, who spent about an hour with us answering the multitude of questions that those 47 staff members came up with from A to Z. And we felt very comfortable and confident that they would be able to meet the needs of our students and would partner with us such that we would not feel as if we would just transferring our students to Virtual Virginia and not having any input with support for students with disabilities, for students who would be in crisis, with our school counselors. So we would still have some connectivity. So, it really comes out to be a win-win, I think, for the school division as well as for our staff and students.
Okay, so we will continue in workshop format in the formal meeting. It'll be agenda item 17. We'll propose after non-agenda speakers, and we'll start where we ended with our speakers in the queue. So thank you all, and we re-adjourn here at 6 o'clock for a formal meeting.
Thank you.